Thank you for coming. I'm so delighted that you're here to join us in the celebration of Elon's 125th anniversary. It's a wonderful time in the life of this institution, and I'm delighted that you're here. The Christian Church was founded in 1794, and all through the 1800s, when there were many church-related colleges being founded in North Carolina, the people in this very small, struggling, new denomination, the Christian Church, talked about starting a school. They had had a connection with Graham College here in this county, but they wanted to start a school of their own to train ministers and teachers. However, they did not succeed in starting a school until March 11, 1889. Almost 100 years after the formation of the denomination, it founded Elon, and the official act doing that was passed by the legislature of the state of North Carolina on March 11, 1889. The site for the location of the new college was chosen here, a place which was known as Mill Point. Now that's an unusual name. The reason for that name was that out in the country north of here, there were two textile mills, and they brought in goods by railroad to the train station here, and they shipped the finished goods by rail from the train station here, and this train depot was called Mill Point. So this site was selected for the location of the new institution. They decided to name this new college Elon, the Hebrew word for oak, because the place, the campus, was abundantly populated by trees, all sorts of trees, but the predominant one was the oak tree. Many different varieties of oak were here. And so, Christian Church started the school. We named it Elon. The first president of the school was William S. Long. William S. Long was a native of this county. He was a minister. He was an educator. He served as superintendent of schools in this county, and he was named the first president. He did everything from the planning of the buildings, the supervision of the construction, the raising of the money for the construction, the employment of the faculty, and then he taught about 12 different courses. Sometimes my students in my Elon history class will say, "Did he know that much?" And the answer was, no, he didn't know that much. But don't get uptight about this. He was not the only person who taught a course he'd never had. I remember in 1950, I had a group of students, World War II veterans largely, who were going to medical school and dental school, and they came to me and said, "We want to take biochemistry." I said, "Look, guys, I haven't had biochemistry." They said, "Well, couldn't you teach it?" I said, "Sure, I can teach it." I've never lacked in self-confidence. So I go over to Chapel Hill to the medical school, and I look up the textbook they're using in the biochemistry course in the medical school. It was a book called Human Biochemistry, written by Elon. I bought a copy and I brought it back, and I went through that book chapter by chapter and made a list of study questions on each chapter, mimeographed that, and I went to class. 13 students taking biochemistry with a professor who'd never had the course. And I said to them, "Now, you're going to read the book and you're going to be ready to answer these questions, and when we come to class, I'm going to call on you and you will answer the questions, and then we'll have examinations." And the exam I gave them, I could not have passed myself. But we had a wonderful time in that course in biochemistry, and I remembered Long had taught He'd taught philosophy and history and geology and geography, all kinds of things that he didn't know anything about. Near the end of the semester, I began to be frightened. I realized that out of the 13 students, 12 of them were getting A's. And that's not much of a grade curve. So I go to see the dean. And I said, Dean Bowden, I've got a problem. He said, what is the problem? I said, 12 of my 13 students are getting A's. He said, let's see your roll book. And I handed him, and he started reading Williamson and Robertson and the Hanel and the Howell boys. And he said, Earl, these are all A students. I said, that's what I told you. They're all A students. At the end of the semester, I turned in 12 A's and 1 B. The B student was a traditional student. All the others were people who had been in service and had all 12 A's, 1 B. Those boys went off to medical school, and they came back and told me what a wonderful thing it was. When the other students were struggling with biochemistry in that same book, they were just gliding along. And they spent the extra time working with anatomy, and they thanked me for having served them. Okay, at the end of 5 years, Long was simply worn out. He had served for 5 years, he had done everything, and he simply was worn out. And he resigned the presidency. Now, this is a very small college. This college has very little in terms of resources. They need a new president, and nobody wanted it. There was a man preaching, one of our people, preaching in Suffolk, Virginia, a man by the name of W.W. Staley. Papa Staley had been on the original board of trustees for Elon, and he was a very successful minister in Suffolk. And they asked him to become the second president. He didn't want that. He had a growing church. He was very happy in Suffolk. The people were happy with him. And he said, I just can't do it. Well, they had nobody else. They worked on him. They talked to him. And he said, okay. I don't think he said okay. He probably wasn't that informal. But he said yes. He agreed to become the second president on condition that he continued to live in Suffolk and he continued to serve the Suffolk Christian Church, that he be the non-resident president without salary. During the time that he was president, through a 10-year period, he did not live here. He lived in Suffolk. Every 2 weeks or so, he would ride the train here and talk with the faculty about what was to happen. Then he'd go back to Suffolk, then back on the train. During that time, his 3 daughters all attended and graduated at Elon. He paid the tuition for the 3 daughters, Miss Annie and Miss Bessie and Miss Willie. I got to know Miss Annie and Miss Bessie in their later years, and it was a thrill to get to know Dr. Staley's daughters. He has a great-grandson who is a student here now, excellent chemistry student. He's doing some tremendous undergraduate research, and it's great to know Chris and to know that connection with Papa Staley. After 10 years as president, Dr. Staley resigned. He was so busy with his church in Suffolk, he needed to be there. He served that church 50 years and was really a legend in the city of Suffolk, Virginia. Okay, here we are again. We need a president. Nobody wants it. It's not a very enticing sort of place. There's no money, no resources. It's uphill business. They still did not have a powerhouse. There was no electricity. There was no heat. There was no running water. They had to have a president. They talked to E.L. Moffett. Moffett had been a member of the original faculty. He had taught language. And then he had left the faculty to become editor of the church paper. Now, it's hard for us in the year 2013 to recognize how important the church paper was. It was called the Christian Sun. They started publishing it at about 1850. But it was a very important paper to the people in the local churches in the countryside. As I was a little boy, we had neighbors. He was a Civil War veteran. They didn't have a daily paper, but they received the Christian Sun. And we would be back in the field working in the morning. On the noontime, we would stop at their mailbox and pick up the Christian Sun on Thursday and take it to them. And that old couple would sit on the porch in the afternoon and read that 24-page paper front to back. It was very important. And Dr. Moffat edited that paper for a while. And then he left the editorship of the paper and became a member of his family business in Asheboro, North Carolina. They manufactured and sold wheelbarrows. And this man was the secretary-treasurer of the Asheboro Wheelbarrow Company when he was elected president of Elon. Moffat's health was never very good. He served as president. He did at least two very important things. One of them was he built a powerhouse. This was the first time that we had running water on campus. Until then, it was necessary to go out to the well and get a bucket of water. We did not have central heat. We fired up fireplaces and stoves. We did not have any electricity on campus or in town. He then built a powerhouse, 1907. And he built West Dormitory. When we first built the main building here, we built one other building, and it was called East Dormitory. It was a dormitory for women. And that reminds me to tell you a very important fact about this institution. From day one, it was coeducational. And that was very, very different in North Carolina. The Baptists, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Moravians, the Quakers, all of them had started church colleges, but they were basically colleges for men. When Elon College was founded, it was founded as a coeducational institution, and the only dormitory on campus was a dormitory for women. The second thing he did was to build West Dormitory. We're still using West Dormitory. 1907, he opened West Dormitory. He moved the women from East into West, and that opened up East Dormitory. So for the first time in 1907, we had a dormitory for men students. Until then, men either stayed at home and came in as commuters, or they rented a room from some farmer down the road, or they camped out. The third floor of the old main building had not been completed, but it was open, and men students would put on a pallet and sleep third floor of the old building because there was no dormitory for them on campus. Moffat then was the president until 1911. He continued to be very interested in the college and very supportive of the college. 1941, the alumni had a banquet in Burlington in the hotel there. Moffat was the speaker. He had continued to be very supportive of the institution. He gave a good speech to the alumni. He encouraged them to believe that the best is yet to be. That old man had no idea. He finished his speech, he sat down at the banquet table and died. So when I talk to my students in my history class about Moffat, I say he was with us to the end. He always supported Elon, and he did a great job for us. Okay, it's 1911. We need a new president. This keeps happening to us. We still are not very strong. We're in better shape than we have been. We've got some new buildings. We've got a powerhouse. We can now go to the bathroom. For the first 17 years of the institution, you couldn't go to the bathroom. We didn't have one. But this time, we had a likely candidate for the presidency. He was an Elon graduate, class of 1899. He was one of the smartest kids down on the block. He had one of the highest academic averages that any student had had here. After that, he went out and taught in high school for a couple of years, and then he was employed to come back as a faculty member. The first thing he did then was to go to Yale University and get a master's degree. Then he returned here to teach languages and religious education. At age 28, he was named dean of the college. I was named dean when I was 29. He was always ahead of me. And then in 1911, he was invited to be president of the institution. Now, he was the first man, as far as I know, and I believe this is true, he was the first one who was really prepared to be president, and I think he wanted to be president. At age 31, he became president of the college. I was 32 before I became president. He was always ahead of me, but in many other ways, he was ahead of everybody else too. Harper was a teacher, he was a scholar, he was an author, he was a leader, he had a magnetic personality, he had everything going for him. And so during the teen years, Elon grew and developed under the leadership of W.A. Harper. Now, Harper did a lot of wonderful things. He would walk up to a farm boy, somebody from over in Guilford County or Rockingham, and say, "Fletcher, you ought to go to Yale." Or, "John, you ought to go to Princeton." Now, we were an unaccredited institution, and those students would not normally be accepted in those institutions except Harper said so. And if Harper recommended one of those guys, they went to those institutions. Elon began to have a substantial record, largely because of Harper. Okay, World War I came and it hit the college hard, and that hurt Harper's administration, what they were trying to do here. And then in the fall of 1918, the flu epidemic, a terrific, terrible time. Many of our students were ill. We actually lost some by death during the flu epidemic in 18. Finally, we recovered from that and we moved forward again. And then in January 23, we had a devastating fire. Old Main building burned. Main building had the offices, the classrooms, the library, the museum. It had the academic life was all focused on Old Main. In January 23, it burned. It was a devastating blow to this institution. He called his board of trustees together. And I think about what it must have been like. They look out the window of East Dormitory where they were meeting, and they could see the smoke coming up from the ashes of beloved Old Main. I've thought about it. It seems to me it would not have been unreasonable for that board of trustees to have said, "Dr. Harper, we've worked hard. We have contributed. We have sacrificed. We're going to quit and go home." I could have understood that. They were seemingly just defeated. But don't forget, Harper was there. And one man can be a majority if it's the right man. And Harper was the right man. And that board of trustees, there with the smoke still coming up from the ashes, took a vote. And the motion was, resolve that we plan for the next 100 years. How audacious. How incredible. How unbelievable that with almost nothing left except Harper, they voted to plan for the next 100 years. And they went home. And Harper planned the 5 main buildings: Alamance, Whitley, Carleton, Duke, and Mooney. And then he began to raise the money. You know, the president's always got to do that. He went out to California and he talked with Mr. Orban and he got $50,000 to build Mooney Christian Education Building. He went over to Durham and talked with the Duke brothers, got $50,000 to build Duke Science Building. He went over in the southern part of Virginia to a church family, the Carltons, and he got $50,000 to build a new library. He went down to Norfolk and talked to a man down there, and he got a pledge for $100,000 to build Whitley Auditorium. He talked to the people in Alamance County, and they gave money toward the construction of the Alamance building. And then the building program, 1924, 25, 5 buildings going up on this campus. You know why we talk about doing things like a phoenix? Out of the ashes, like a phoenix, a new campus arose. Unfortunately, this nation went into deep depression before the debts were paid. Elon ended up owing about $500,000. That was a lot of money then, and no money available. People didn't have money to send their sons and daughters to Elon. By December of 31, accreditation which he had won for the institution in 1926 was lost. The student body enrollment had dwindled till we had a total of 80 students, only 80 students on this campus. He couldn't pay the interest on the debt. He couldn't pay his faculty. We were bankrupt. It looked like Elon would close. Got to have a new president. Harper left, spring of 31. And so for months we had no president at all. The English professor was the acting chairman of the faculty, but we had no president and very few students. It was a sad time. It looked like Elon was going to die. And then the board began to talk with another Elon graduate, a man by the name of L.E. Smith. Smith had graduated here in 1910 and was serving as the pastor of the Christian Temple in Norfolk, Virginia. After he graduated Elon, he'd gone to Princeton, got a master's degree. He'd preached out in Indiana for a while, and then he came back to Norfolk and was pastor of the Christian Temple. He was president of the Southern Christian Convention, and the Southern Christian Convention owned Elon at the time. It was its institution. And Smith began to be interested in the possibility of becoming president. If he were here, I would like to say to him, Dr. Smith, you wanted to be president. And he would say, oh, no, I didn't want to be president. I think he did. He came in the late fall of 31 and began to investigate the possibility of becoming Elon's president. And then by December 31, he became acting president. He still was the pastor of the Christian Temple in name. He still held on to that job, although he was not there. He went to the meeting of the Southern Association early December of 31, and that's when they voted to deny Elon further accreditation. We didn't have money, some other things were problems, and so they took away the accreditation of the institution, December 31. That time he decided to become acting president of the institution. And one of the first things he did to try to raise some money to pay the faculty, he wrote 500 letters to the residents of Alamance County. And he asked them each to send back a donation of $3. Each one asked to donate $3. In response to those 500 letters, he got back 3 letters. One of them had $10 in it. He raised $16 with those 500 letters. Folks, it was hard times. He went around the countryside begging money wherever he could. They even were so desperate that they put glass jars on the table in Sunday schools in the denomination and asked the children to donate pennies for Elon. He held on as acting president, and I don't know what happened during the spring of 32, but some funny business went on, because in December he had 80 students. In May, when school closed, he had 200 students. Now, what I think happened was that anybody who showed up any day during the spring semester and said, I want to go to school, was admitted. I was telling my daughter about that last night, and she said that's what they call rolling admissions. He added those students all during the spring. And he wanted so bad to have an athletic team that he decided to give athletic scholarships. And this was his rationale. I've got the classrooms, I've got empty seats in the classroom, I've got professors in the classroom, I've got empty beds, so the student can have a classroom, he can have a bedroom, doesn't cost us anything. So if he will pay for his meals, we don't lose anything, so he brought in athletes. Started some intercollegiate athletics with athletic scholarships. It was not until August of 32 that he finally wrote a letter to the Christian Temple resigning the pastorate of that church. And he wrote a letter to the Board of Trustees accepting the presidency of Elon College. Shortly after that, he and Ms. Smith moved here, and he took over as pastor of the Elon Community Church, a job which he held while he was president. He also was pastor of the local church from fall of 32 until 1946, when we got a full-time pastor. During that time, they lived in the parsonage for the local church. The college did not have a place for the president to live until 1946, when they moved into an old house that we had. Smith had to do a lot of things that, thank goodness, those of us who served later have not been faced with. He had all that indebtedness. And those people to whom he owed it tried to take legal action to get money, and he didn't have the money. The story is told that on registration day, when a little money was coming in, he would have a student take that little money as it came in, run across the railroad, and put that money under the bed of Mr. Johnson's house. Johnson was the treasurer of the Board of Trustees, and so they hid the money so that when the sheriff came to get the money, so we don't have any money. It was on the other side of the railroad, under the bed. He got a hold of a little bit of securities. He took those securities into his secretary and said, take these to a bank. Put them in my name, and don't tell me where you put it. The sheriff came. We want those securities. I don't have them. Well, you know where they, no, I don't know where they are. He had to do a lot of funny business. But I always say, he saved the college. He stayed with it, everlastingly with it, until finally Elon was debt-free. At which time we started borrowing money to build new buildings. Smith served for 25 years, and then need a new president. And you know what this Board of Trustees is going to do? They're going to meet and they're going to pick somebody. So they met February of 57, and they elected a new president. I was at Johns Hopkins doing some postdoctoral research, and I get a telephone call. George Koch was calling. I thought somebody had died. He said, no, we elected a new president, Elon, today. And I said, who's that? He said, you. Nobody had asked me if I wanted it. Nobody had asked me, would I take it? Just selected me and said, you're it. Like to play in a game. I said, George, you're crazy. No, he said, we've talked it over. We think you ought to be the next president. I went back in the kitchen. My dear wife was there washing dishes. She said, who was that? I said, George Cocos. She said, what's wrong? She thought somebody died. I said, they elected a new president, Elon, today. And she said, who? Me. She looked up from her dishwater and said, poor Earl. Now, you might wonder why she would say that. I'd just been elected president of the college. She had been the secretary for President Smith for 6 years. She became secretary to the president of Elon College when she was 17 years old, August of 1941. And for 6 years, she had seen the pressures, the difficulties, the heartbreak as serving as president, and she really didn't want us to do it. But on the morning I left Baltimore to come down to talk with the executive committee, she said, whatever you have to do, I'm with you. And she was great. She baked cookies, and she hosted dinners, and she did everything that a president's wife ever had to do. She did them all, and she did them superbly. We served 16 years. I became president when I was 32 years old, 56 years ago last July, and served for 16 years. And I was tired. I was worn out. I thought if I have to go to another meeting and smile at those people, I'll die. So I went to the meeting of the executive committee and I said, this is it. I'm resigning. I'm retiring. And they said, you can't do it. You're doing a capital campaign. You've got to stay with that campaign till you finish it. Crumpton was there, member of the board, and he said, you go down to Jupiter, Florida, spend a month in my house down there, come back and go to work. So I went home and I told my wife I tried to resign, didn't make it. We're going to go to Florida. Oh, what a beautiful place. Oh my gosh, on that beautiful river. Look across the river, there's Perry Como's house. I mean, it was uptown. And for 2 weeks we were there. Came back and went back to work. Finished the campaign. And then it was time for me to retire. So I got down to the paper in the morning. I talked to the editor of the paper and I said, here's the story. I am retiring today. The executive committee came to town and I sat down with them and I said, now folks, we've got to talk about my retirement. They said, you can't do it. I said, wait a minute. You haven't read today's paper. No fooling around this time. I get to go back to the chemistry classroom in the fall of next year. Okay. Well, you know this board, you know what they're going to do. They elect a president. This time they had a search committee. It didn't do anything. It was a known fact they were going to elect Fred Young as the next president. He'd worked with the schools in Burlington. Everybody knew him. He wanted to be president, so he was elected. And he came to work on the first day of August 1973. And 25 years, Fred Young was president. He brought to us a new approach. He introduced long-range planning. He brought a lot of other changes for 25 years. And one day I said, Fred, you've been president about long enough. Nobody else would have said that to Fred. I was fairly fearless. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, Smith served 25 years and he didn't want anybody to ever serve longer than he had, and you were pushing it. So he retired. And then, for the first time in the history of this institution, we had a real search committee. And those people worked. They had 140 names of applicants and people who were nominated and so on. They went through this list carefully. They worked through it. It was amazing. And they ended up finally, after all their work and some assistance from a headhunting firm in Washington, D.C., they ended up with 2 candidates. And then they announced they're going to bring them to campus. I'd been through chancellor searches and presidential searches at the university system where I've been on the board of trustees, on the board of governors. And I thought it was a mistake to let people know who you're looking at. But they decided to bring them here. The first day, the man came, one of their top 2 candidates. We gathered in Whitley Auditorium to meet these people. I'm sitting on the second row. I'm right there. And the guy came in and he made a little speech. And I taught public speaking once upon a time. I gave him a C+. It was a poor speech. My God, if the guy can't make a talk, what is wrong? And then the chaplain asked him a question, and he didn't answer it. I went home and I said to my wife, when he asked the question, that guy circled the field 3 times and didn't land. Pitiful. I said, if they have spent all these months looking for candidates and they've gotten that creep, we're in trouble. Well, 2 days later, here's Leo Lambert. He's the other one of the 2 top candidates. I'm on the second row in Whitley. I'm ready. He walked through the door in the front of that auditorium, and that man walked directly to me, stuck out his hand and said, "You must be President Danieley." And I said to myself, he must be one smart cookie. He knew who I was. Now, that wasn't terribly important to anybody else but me. Then he made his speech. I gave him an A. And then the question from the chaplain, the same question, and he answered it straightforward, right to the point. And I went home and I said, honey, we got a president. And I'm here to tell you, I have known many college presidents over the years. I've worked with a number of them, and he is one of the best I have ever seen. Leo Lambert is one of the nation's top college and university presidents, and we are more fortunate than you can ever know. And I am so fortunate to be able to be here and to be engaged in the institution and to support him as he leads us to be one of the nation's great universities. What a wonderful life. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for allowing me the privilege of working with your students. Some of the best kids in the world and some of the finest people I've ever seen in my life. And it's a joy of my life to go to that chemistry class and that Elon 101 class and work with some beautiful people. Thank you so much.